Solitary confinement, supermaximum prison. What do we know about these things? One web search on solitary or supermax would produce a long list of returns. Solitary confinement is a problem that is not only on the minds of Americans today, but one that is ripe for sociological investigation. Good morning, everybody. My name is Zachary Salso, and the title of my senior thesis is Desired Outcomes of Solitary Supermax, Empirical Investigations Question Efficacy. Here's a discussion, an outline for our discussion this morning. We're going to touch on the history of solitary, the rise thereof, review of empirical studies on efficacy, exploring meditation towards new outcomes, limitations and opportunities for future research as well. So to begin with, what are the desired outcomes of solitary? The role of desired outcomes of solitary confinement have changed historically to reflect changing social views. First desired outcome of solitary beginning in the 19th century was reform. Crime was believed to be infectious but curable. Solitary was the best cure. By the late 19th century, solitary was abandoned, reserved only for short-term use due to economic reasons and little proof of effectiveness. However, it would not be abandoned completely, for it remained an integral part of the prison system. In the early 70s, renewed interest came about due to psychologists becoming interested in studying the techniques of isolation within the context of human behavior in extreme situations. So desired outcomes in this case became rehabilitation. As before, deserted by the late 1970s due to lacking economic resources and an increasing number of inmates. Soon after, however, we see a final return of solitary confinement, which would become the birth of the Supermax. This was catapulted by escalating violence at Marion Federal Prison in Illinois, reaching its peak on October 22nd, 1983. That day, inmates killed 2 guards and injured 4 others. In response, the prison was put under a 24-hour lockdown, and this was a week later formalized with also the abandonment of all rehabilitation rhetoric. This trend pushed across the nation. It spread, and it was spread to other penal institutions across the nation in what is now termed the process of Marionization. So what is solitary, and what is it like to be within the Supermax? It is very highly restrictive, a high custody housing unit which isolates inmates from the general population as well as themselves. Conditions are 23-hour lockdown, 1 hour for bathing and exercise, little to no human contact, little to none in some circumstances, like never touching another individual for your tenure in solitary. In a space not much larger than a small bathroom. So with continued growth of prison populations fueled by get tough ideology, the war on drugs, and legislative reform, prison administrators implemented solitary out of perceived necessity. New technologies in security and surveillance methods further contributed to the rise of the Supermax. An empirical piece of this is depicted by the massive growth you'll see here on this graph, to the right, in prison populations in connection with drug offenses. So we have the dark, which all can see is the 80s, and then the light is 2000. This is just a comparison. So significant increases, and this is due to drug offenses, which is a very empirical piece to sort of the notion of ideology being a very strong force in the way penalism is developing in this case here. So following the growth of the Supermax, how effective is the return of solitary in affecting management and control? In an 06 questionnaire, wardens of Supermaxes were asked to reflect on the issues of solitary. Almost unanimously, they agreed the goals were to increase safety and order, to incapacitate violence and disruptive members, and to create better staff and working conditions. However, more than half also identified negative, unforeseen consequences as well, such as decreased staff morale and increased stress on staff, diminished mental health of inmates, increased suicide attempts and inmate violence, and understandings of constituting cruel and unusual punishment. In addition, an 03 landmark strength study by Briggs, the findings thereof revealed that the implementation of Supermax failed to reduce aggregate levels of inmate-on-inmate assaults. Less clear, however, was a connection between the implementation of Supermax and inmate violence directed towards staff members. This evidence shows insufficient data consistent with the achievement of desired outcomes. Although mental health is not a desired outcome for solitary use in its current form, the negative impact it has on inmates is a growing problem for concern for not only prison administrators, but also many people, activists, psychologists, and yes, even sociologists. Mental health conditions within the Supermax are oftentimes characterized by a complete lack of stimulation, antiseptic and sterile. Solitary housing conditions lead to a dependence on structure and, in extreme cases, profound despair. A problem with defining the desired outcome of solitary as solely prison management and control is that it is very narrow. It is too narrow. It is void of any concern for individual inmates' psychological and physical well-being. With this in mind, what role can meditation have in creating new desired outcomes? Meditation is an emotional and attentional regulatory strategy. Within this context of solitary, holding the potential goal of helping inmates develop positive relationships and cultivating dynamic security through a more effective use of time and space. Dhamma Brothers is one example of this possibility. Vipassana, a meditative practice, was used in Donaldson, Alabama, maximum security, which is below Supermax, on a 10-day retreat for selected inmates. Here is Grady Bankhead, and he speaks to his experience.
In order for me to get to a place where I could forgive myself for what I had done, I just couldn't find it in every program. Anger to forgiveness, stress management. The thing that I was concerned about, it wasn't the things that I knew about. I know how to face those. It's the things that were causing something in me that I couldn't get to. I thought it was just the forgiveness that I needed for myself. That was just a very small piece. I had a lot of miseries, a lot of really serious anger issues, abandonment issues that were so deep that I didn't know they existed. I didn't know that they were causing the actions that I was doing every day, my cravings and things that I had going on. It takes time, but if you just recognize it and move past it, it chips away a little bit each time, and eventually that misery dissolves.
Grady's powerful stuff. Grady's personal experience is reflected by the results of Donaldson. For example, a 20% reduction of institutional and segregation time. All of this signifies a shift, a potential for shift within the prison culture from one that is of violence, a concern for prison management, and despair, a concern for inmate well-being, towards one of positive change. However, this expansion of desired outcomes for solitary faces limitations and needs for future research. Better understanding the efficacy of the current desired outcomes, the effectiveness of Supermax needs to be questioned on a range of dimensions other than serious violent inmate violence. Also, aggregate levels of institutional violence need to be further examined within the context of current desired outcomes. A disparity also in the standardization of the use of solitary nationwide makes the investigation into efficacy difficult, and some level of consensus could be reached for better understanding and clarity of the role of solitary and how to measure its efficacy. In regards to changing outcomes, public and institutional investment interests are crucial to creating this change. Economic costs and personal training services are also barriers. As well, there is a significant need for future research on the efficacy of meditation for the needs, the interests, and the backgrounds of rehabilitation efforts for inmates. This is a vast area of research, and the questions of desired outcomes and efficacy require much further investigation. There is growing unrest in many quarters over the conditions of solitary confinement. An answer to Mead's question, how can institutional change from within be undertaken? Perhaps the best way to begin is to gain a better understanding of the effectiveness of present desired outcomes, management and control, and moving forward from there towards a more compassionate approach to inmates who may benefit from a return to some form of rehabilitation efforts. Some slide sources. And this brings the end of my formal remarks. I thank you very much for being here this morning. Kevin.
Is there any literature that concern possible conflicts between meditation and image religion?
Literature, no. In the Dharma Brothers documentary, there's talk about public conceptions. This is the South, right? So public conceptions of Buddhism and meditation. As well, the warden specifically spoke to this, saying that, this is a Christian population. We're not going to be Buddhists here. So that was a definite ideological, larger barrier to this, a little less concrete, but still nevertheless very much in play. As far as literature, no, though, but I'm sure that it's, a thing. Please.
I think that's really interesting because, it would seem to me, and I don't know if you found this, there's a question about what you found in the literature, or following up on Kevin's question about this perceived incompatibility, because there really is no God at the center of Buddhism. It's a quote religion, but there's no God at the center. And so a lot of Buddhist teachers, talk about it being very compatible with lots of different religions. Is that sort of meditation as a practice. It doesn't displace whoever or whatever you consider to be a God.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you found any of that. Did the literature show sort of where people tried to push back around that, or in terms of entry into prisons, or?
None of my literature does speak to that per se. There is definitely an element of meditation that is non-religious. It's defined by certain psychological literature, as I said, basically a tool, a regulatory strategy, which is very non-religious. And a shift in the literature and the philosophy literature is showing that people are embracing new forms of spirituality that are not religious. So this is definitely a trend. So I think that, considering that, this is not incompatible with the current prison institutions. And I think it really just depends on awareness and knowing what it is. People are knowing more now what meditation is, but there still may be some carryover, of conceptions of being purely religious. So if that answers your question.
It does, and then I have a follow-up, which is, you talked about meditation. Were the studies you're looking at meditation for people specifically in solitary, or were they meditation for people in general population?
General. The Dahmer Brothers took place in a maximum security, which is not Supermax. So this is a different scenario. So I'm reaching here, right? It's a case study, and I use it because he's serving life, that parole, you know, he has similar circumstances. So, not yet, but a piece of it is sort of arguing for, tacitly for a return to some form of rehabilitation within the current, you know, paradigm. I mean, you can't change everything tomorrow. So, what we can do is certainly fight for, you know, like what we're talking about, because that's a step, you know. I mean, compared to what's happening now, it's a big step. So.